In an underground fight club, a heavily tattooed fighter knocked down his opponent with a whip kick. This was already his 6th consecutive victory tonight. Just as he was basking in his own glory, a new challenger stepped into the ring. The moment the hooded challenger took off his jacket, revealing his face and muscular physique, the entire crowd erupted in boos. It seemed everyone knew this man. The arrogance of the previous fighter suddenly vanished. He was so terrified that he simply gave up the match and left the venue. The man, who hadn't even thrown a punch, easily won the match and collected tonight's prize money. The enraged crowd cursed non-stop. As the man named Dalton prepared to leave, an angry man behind him called out. The man immediately plunged a dagger into Dalton's abdomen. It turned out Dalton's win had cost him $500. But to his surprise, Dalton gripped his hand without a change in expression, asking if he had thought things through. The man was intimidated by Dalton's aura, dropped the dagger in fear, and fled in a panic. The dagger was left sticking out of Dalton's body. Dalton, who was accustomed to such things, walked to the back of his car, took out some duct tape, and prepared to give himself a simple bandage. Unexpectedly, a woman approached him and started talking. Frankie recognized Dalton as a tough character and wanted to hire him with a high salary as a bouncer for her island restaurant. Dalton immediately rejected Frankie's offer, but Frankie wouldn't give up. She wrote down her phone number, hoping he would seriously consider it. In truth, Dalton really needed a job with a stable income. He didn't even have a place to live, sleeping in his car every night and constantly being chased away by the police. He seemed to have a painful past he couldn't forget, an event that kept replaying in his mind. Dalton stopped his car at a railway crossing as a train was about to pass, but he drove his car onto the tracks. For a moment, he contemplated taking his own life. As the train got closer and the whistle grew louder, Dalton hesitated for a moment, but decided to keep living. However, he tried to start the car for a long time, but it wouldn't move. At the very last second, the car finally responded, but the train had arrived. The car spun around after being hit, but fortunately, Dalton was still alive. He felt that God was looking out for him. Since this was the case, he decided to continue living properly and find a decent job. His eyes landed on the phone number Frankie had left. He took a bus to the scenic Florida Keys, where beautiful coastlines and coconut trees made the place feel like a paradise on earth. Arriving here, Dalton felt his mood improve a great deal. As soon as he got off the bus, a young girl greeted him. She was the bookstore owner's daughter, eccentric, hospitable, and she even gave Dalton a book. Following the girl's directions, Dalton found the seaside restaurant. He ordered a coffee at the bar. He thought the place was excellent, quiet and peaceful. Hearing that, Laura at the bar let out a speechless laugh, because by nightfall, this handsome guy might not be thinking the same way anymore. Sure enough, at night, the restaurant transformed entirely. Dalton finally understood why Frankie wanted to hire him as a bouncer. Even the restaurant's band was enclosed in a wire mesh cage to prevent interference from drunks. At that moment, a group of burly men on motorcycles walked in. The leader was clearly there to cause trouble and started destroying things. Dalton looked up at Frankie, who was watching him from the second floor. He knew it was time for him to step in and show his stuff. He called the group of troublemakers outside the restaurant. 6 big men surrounded Dalton. They laughed heartily, thinking they could use this man as a punching bag for fun, but Dalton struck first.
Что? Что за хрень? Черт, блин! Давай, врежь ему!
He slapped each of them across the face, then quickly punched them down one by one. Dell, refusing to accept defeat, was directly thrown to the ground by Dalton, who relentlessly slammed his face with an iron fist until he finally lay still. The onlookers were stunned. They hadn't expected the bouncer Frankie hired to be so formidable, but Dalton proved to be a good guy who saw things through. He personally drove the thugs to the hospital. The on-duty female doctor, Ellie, also saw Dalton as unique. She noticed the blood flowing from Dalton's waist and re-cleaned and bandaged his wound. They talked happily, and Dalton displayed a long-lost smile. Returning to the restaurant, Dalton received his first advance payment from Frankie. It seemed Frankie was quite satisfied with his debut performance that night. She even offered Dalton the boathouse she had docked at the pier as a temporary place to stay. Dalton stood on the boat watching the distant sunrise, feeling that everything was moving in a good direction. But the next day, Dalton felt something strange. It seemed overnight all the islanders knew his name. Everyone was aware that a formidable bouncer had arrived at the seaside restaurant. However, this super bouncer couldn't change the islanders' tough nature, and the restaurant still saw drunken fights and disturbances daily. But Dalton didn't feel these minor scuffles were worth his attention, so he taught the young waiters how to anticipate an opponent's move and counterattack. They seemed quick learners and immediately grasped the techniques. Thus, the daily disturbances were easily resolved by the two young employees. Dalton's job became much easier. Every night, his presence alone was enough to deter some drunks from trying to get free drinks. During the day, Dalton would go to the bookstore to use the internet, and he became close friends with Charlie. Although life was easy and comfortable, Dalton still suffered from nightmares every night. He dreamt of fighting an opponent in an international top-tier heavyweight boxing match. He would always wake up with a start, and this nightmare seemed to foreshadow bad things to come. One evening, Dalton was walking home from work on the bridge when a truck suddenly accelerated and drove toward him from behind. Dalton leaped away, dodging the impact. The truck reversed and drove toward him again. This time, Dalton didn't dodge in time and was knocked straight into the truck's rear compartment. The truck, driven with too much force, crashed through the railing and was left hanging over the bridge's edge. The driver and his female companion quickly abandoned the truck and fled for their lives. The truck began to tilt rapidly, and Dalton fell straight into the sea. He managed to surface and struggled back to the houseboat, only to find Dell, whom he had sent to the hospital last time, sitting inside with a hunting rifle. It turned out the driver who hit Dalton was also one of Dell's people. Dalton gave a helpless, bitter smile, not knowing why Dell was so fixated on him. But Dell revealed the real reason. His boss's true target wasn't Dalton, but the seaside restaurant. Dalton seized the opportunity, knocked Dell down, and threw him straight into the sea. However, he only wanted to punish him and had no intention of killing Dell, so he prepared to pull him out. Unexpectedly, an alligator suddenly lunged out of the water, bit Dell's leg, and brutally dragged him into the water until he vanished. This sudden turn of events terrified Dalton. The seemingly peaceful water was fraught with danger. The next day, the police searched near the dock for a long time, but couldn't find Dell's body. It seemed the alligator had completely devoured him. However, things were far from over. Someone else had come looking for him. A man stopped Dalton on the road, saying his boss wanted to meet him, but Dalton couldn't be bothered. The man unexpectedly pulled out a gun and threatened him. Dalton, a former tough guy himself, wasn't afraid of threats. He walked over and snapped the man's finger. After dealing with the small-time thugs, Dalton decided to ask Frankie what was truly going on and why this group was targeting the restaurant. But Frankie acted completely unaware, dismissed the issue as minor, and quickly sent Dalton away. In reality, she knew everything but concealed the truth from Dalton, fearing she would scare away the person she had just hired. It turned out that the boss of this group was Brant, the son of a local gang leader. Since his father was currently serving time in prison, all affairs were being handled by Brant. Brant wanted to buy the seaside restaurant's land to build a resort, but Frankie adamantly refused to sell, so he sent people to cause trouble repeatedly. He hadn't expected Frankie to hire a super expert who instantly took down several of his men, which caused Brant a major headache. Frankie's father, who was in prison, heard about what had happened and hired a psychopathic enforcer to hunt down Dalton. This man swaggered out of the house of the woman he'd been having an affair with completely naked, strolling down the street without the slightest concern for the shocked looks from people around him. He even stole a passerby's clothes and then set a fire in the market. This beast-like man would be Dalton's strongest opponent yet. Meanwhile, Dalton was still unaware of the danger looming. The beautiful doctor, Ellie, proactively took him out on her yacht. Ellie drove the boat to the deep sea where there was a shallow sandbar. They sat on the water, comfortably drinking beer and chatting. But when Ellie asked Dalton personal questions he clearly didn't want to answer, reluctant to let anyone know about his past. He even stood up, wanting to leave immediately. However, Ellie had already learned about Dalton's past online. She was willing to get close to this man with a dark history. Dalton finally let down his guard, and they kissed. When Dalton returned to the houseboat, 2 police officers showed up, wanting to talk to him about Dell's death the previous night. Unexpectedly, Dalton was taken to a secluded location. A police chief got into the car to speak with him alone. The chief wanted Dalton to leave, threatening to throw him in prison on a trumped-up charge. Dalton gave a wry smile. He hadn't realized that even the police here were corrupt, and he wasn't someone who would leave after a simple threat. The furious chief pulled Dalton out of the car, drew his gun, and planned to shoot him. At that critical moment, Ellie drove up and immediately slapped the chief. And the chief didn't react at all. A stunned Dalton was rescued by Ellie. It turned out the chief was Ellie's father. Ellie, disgusted by her father's collusion with the gang, had always kept her distance from him. Ellie also advised Dalton to leave, warning that the situation there was too deep-rooted, and he alone couldn't overturn the established corruption. He couldn't change anything. Dalton returned to the restaurant, weighed down by worry. He was conflicted, as he had a good job here, and his colleagues were nice. Moreover, this job had saved him from his suicidal intentions. Just as he was feeling uneasy, someone else unexpectedly came looking for him. This time it was Brandt himself. Dalton thought he was another person coming to threaten him to leave. But Brandt didn't do that. Instead, he pulled out his phone and showed Dalton a video. It was a video of one of Dalton's previous matches. In that international competition, Dalton's opponent was also his friend. Dalton had already won the match. But in the end, he fell into a frenzied killing state, ruthlessly punching his opponent who had already collapsed on the ground, blow after blow, until he finally beat him to death right there in the ring. That high-profile match turned Dalton into a demon in everyone's eyes. Since then, he himself had lived with a deep fear. A fear of once again unleashing his inner fury and transforming into a killing monster. Brandt intentionally showed Dalton the video, forcing him to relive the memory he desperately wanted to forget. Seeing that he had achieved his desired effect, Brandt left the bar. Immediately after, Knox made his entrance. He entered the restaurant with a group of henchmen, causing chaos and even tearing the wire mesh protecting the stage. The 2 young waiters tried to restrain Knox, but this man was unlike the usual drunks. He was both insane and highly skilled in fighting, quickly rendering the 2 young men unable to move. Others also joined the fight, and the entire restaurant quickly devolved into a massive brawl, with drunken patrons fighting everywhere. Yet, despite the chaos, Dalton remained seated, motionless, as if the fighting had nothing to do with him. It was only when Knox started shouting Dalton's name that Dalton realized this confrontation was also aimed at him. Knowing he couldn't avoid it, Dalton finally stood up and walked toward Knox. But the incredibly arrogant Knox had to deliver a few cold jokes and provocations before suddenly launching a surprise attack. The 2 elite fighters engaged in combat, but Dalton was clearly affected by the video and lacked the will to fight. He was trapped by Knox's henchmen and subjected to a fierce beating from Knox like a punching bag. This non-resistance puzzled Knox. Ultimately, Dalton was thrown out of the restaurant. He stood up, covered in blood, his eyes utterly lifeless. Knox finally saw what was wrong.
There's something wrong with you. Me too.
Knox let Dalton go, as fighting someone with no will to fight was pointless. Dalton walked away dejectedly, not even stopping when Ellie, who had rushed over, called out to him. Frankie found Dalton at the houseboat. Seeing that he had packed his bags and was ready to leave, Frankie finally admitted to Dalton that she had lied. She had known all along that her restaurant was being eyed by the gang, but concealed it, fearing Dalton would get scared and leave. But it was too late. Dalton, who initially didn't want to leave, grew increasingly fearful after everything that happened, afraid of losing control of his escalating homicidal urges. But as he dragged his luggage to the bus station, he suddenly saw that something had happened to the nearby bookstore. The bookstore had been burned to ruins. Dalton learned that Charlie had also been taken to the hospital. It turned out that Brandt's men noticed how well he got along with Charlie from the bookstore, so they went after both Charlie and the bookstore as well. Watching the bus slowly pull away, Dalton was filled with fury. The last barrier in his heart was finally broken by his anger. He hadn't expected his constant forbearance to lead to this outcome. He felt he couldn't leave yet. This was his fate and the responsibility he had to bear. Dalton located Brandt's luxurious mansion. Only one of Brant's henchmen was there, the very one who had set the bookstore on fire. With a single punch, Dalton fractured his hyoid bone, causing the man to fall into the pool and drown. This was why Dalton had always held back and was reluctant to get truly angry, because once he was truly enraged, his punches were lethal. As Dalton left, he learned from another small-time thug that a secret illicit transaction was scheduled for the next morning on the beach. That night, he had nightmares again. Killing was his primal instinct, and also his deep-seated fear. Before dawn, a corrupt police officer slowly walked toward a small boat, dragging a box from the recent transaction. Dalton quietly approached and knocked the officer out with one punch. He opened the box, finding it filled with stacks of cash. Dalton now had a plan. As he was making a bomb, the police chief predictably rushed to find him. The chief knew Dalton wouldn't return the money, so he lied, claiming Brant had kidnapped Ellie and demanded the cash for her release. Dalton wasn't stupid and knew exactly what kind of person the chief was. He pretended to agree to return the money, seizing the opportunity to learn that Brant was currently hiding out at sea. So Dalton took a small boat and headed straight for the deep ocean. He boarded Brant's yacht, where he saw Brant and the smug chief. The chief thought he had easily tricked the sucker into bringing the money, but he hadn't realized Brant had genuinely kidnapped Ellie. Just then, Knox sped toward them on a speedboat. Things were about to get chaotic, and Dalton decided to add a little more fuel to this farce.
What the hell is he doing?
What the is he doing?
Dalton was left dizzy from the bomb's shockwave, but he forced himself to his feet and searched the boat for any sign of Ellie. He finally found Ellie in the bottom cabin. They broke the glass and swam out of the boat. Another thug lunged at Dalton. Dalton quickly told Ellie to leave first. At that moment, Knox was charging toward them. Dalton took the chance to break free. Ellie frantically boarded a speedboat, but the person driving the speedboat turned out to be Brant. Seeing his yacht destroyed, Brant was enraged and sped toward the coastline, intent on ruining the damned seaside restaurant himself. On the other side, Dalton was still being fiercely tangled up by Knox. Knox turned back, wanting nothing more than to crash into Dalton and kill him. Dalton grabbed the boat's rope, flipped himself onto the speedboat. Before Knox could steady himself, Dalton violently turned the steering wheel, flipping Knox into the sea. Brant saw Dalton chasing him and deliberately turned the boat around, heading straight for Dalton's small boat, aiming to ram and kill the person who had ruined his plans repeatedly. The two boats were about to collide instantly. Luckily, Dalton landed on the soft cushion of the speedboat. Brant grew even more excited, accelerating toward the seaside restaurant. Ellie tried to stop him but was punched down. Brant tried to continue his assault, but Dalton grabbed his fist. Dalton kicked Brant over, and the speedboat was about to crash onto the shore. Climbing ashore, Dalton saw the restaurant, now completely smashed by the boat. The place he had protected had been destroyed after all. Suddenly, Brant, hidden in the shadows, shot a spear gun arrow at him. Furious, Dalton savagely beat Brant. He suddenly heard the roar of an engine approaching. Knox had followed him again. The two engaged in a fierce bare-knuckle fight, evenly matched for a time. Dalton realized he was facing a formidable opponent, so he took off his jacket, resuming the posture of a true fighter. The ruined restaurant became the octagon cage for their final showdown. Knox had also been a notorious professional boxer. Both former professional fighters utilized their competitive martial arts techniques. Dalton rolled to Knox's back in a sideways move and locked his arms around Knox's neck, and no matter how hard Knox struggled, he couldn't break free. Just as he was about to be choked to death by Dalton, he picked up a piece of broken wood from the ground, flipped over, and pinned Dalton. The wooden shard stabbed deeply into Dalton's abdomen. Dalton coughed up blood, appearing to be near death. Knox picked up another shard of wood, slowly looking at Dalton as if admiring his dying prey. Brant, standing nearby, urged Knox to hurry up and finish Dalton off. Annoyed by his nagging, Knox actually snapped Brant's neck right then and there. Dalton used one hand to block the wooden shard aimed at him and began his counterattack. He finally defeated Knox, and he himself was covered in injuries. Ellie looked at the blood-soaked Dalton and the two corpses on the ground. At that moment, she finally understood why Dalton had wanted to avoid her. They were ultimately not meant to be together. Just then, the chief arrived. But this time, he wasn't there to arrest Dalton. He surprisingly told Dalton to leave quickly. Perhaps it was out of gratitude for Dalton saving his daughter. The small island returned to its usual tranquility. The bus arrived, and Dalton said his final goodbyes to Charlie, who had come to see him off. Charlie's father discovered a large box left in the store. He opened it and found it was a box full of money. This was Dalton's gift to them. Charlie's father was about to chase after Dalton but saw that the man had already left on the bus. He was like a lone wanderer from a Western film, who, after resolving the threat of a local villain, rode off westward without a trace, continuing his journey to a distant land. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Knox was not dead. After overpowering a group of doctors and nurses, he walked out of the hospital in his patient gown. He and Dalton may meet again in the near future,